abandoned at the depot on Christmas night, until a quiet rancher found her and changed her life. The small western town of Silver Creek was quiet on Christmas night. Snow covered the wooden streets and the rooftops of the old buildings. Warm yellow lights glowed from the windows of houses, and the sound of distant laughter drifted through the cold air. Families were inside their homes, celebrating together. But at the edge of town stood an old train depot that felt very different from the warm houses. The depot was almost empty. A single lantern hung above the wooden platform, swaying slowly in the winter wind. The tracks stretched far into the snowy darkness, and only the quiet whistle of the wind could be heard. Near one of the benches, hidden beside a stack of old crates, sat a small basket. Inside the basket was a baby girl, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her tiny hands moved slowly as she tried to keep warm. Her soft cries were almost lost in the cold wind. No one noticed her. Travelers had already gone home. The last train had left hours ago. The station master had locked the ticket window and gone to celebrate Christmas with his family. The little baby was alone. For a long time, the only sound around her was the wind moving through the wooden beams of the depot. Then, somewhere down the road, the slow sound of horse hooves began to approach. A tall man rode toward the depot through the falling snow. His coat was old but strong, and his wide cowboy hat protected his face from the cold wind. His name was Caleb Dawson. Caleb was a rancher who lived outside Silver Creek. Most people in town knew him as a quiet man who worked hard and spoke very little. He owned a small ranch with a few horses and cattle, and he spent most of his days working alone in the wide open fields. That night, Caleb had come to the depot to pick up a small supply box that had arrived earlier on the afternoon train. He tied his horse to the wooden post and walked toward the platform. Snow crunched softly under his boots. The depot looked empty. Caleb stepped inside the waiting area, brushing snow from his coat. The room smelled of old wood and cold air. He walked toward the counter where the supply box had been left. Just as he lifted the box, he heard something, a very small sound. At first, Caleb thought it might be the wind, but then he heard it again, a soft cry. Caleb froze. He slowly turned his head and listened carefully. The sound came from outside, near the benches on the platform. Setting the box down, Caleb walked back outside into the cold night. The wind moved the lantern above him, making the shadows dance across the wooden floor. Again, the small cry reached his ears. Caleb followed the sound until he reached the stack of old crates. There, beside them, he saw the basket. He stepped closer and looked inside. His eyes widened. Inside the basket was a tiny baby girl, her face red from the cold. Her small fingers moved weakly as she cried. For a moment, Caleb simply stood there, shocked. He looked around the empty depot. "Hello!" he called out into the night. His voice echoed softly across the snowy platform. No one answered. Caleb walked to the edge of the platform and looked down the road. The town lights glowed in the distance, but there was no one near the depot. Who would leave a baby here? He returned to the basket and gently lifted the blanket. The baby stopped crying for a moment and looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. Caleb felt something strange in his chest, a feeling he had not felt in a long time. Concern. He noticed a small folded piece of cloth tucked beside the baby, but there was no note, no name, nothing to explain where she had come from. The wind grew stronger, and the baby began to cry again. Caleb knew the cold night was too harsh for her to stay there. Carefully, he picked up the basket and wrapped the blanket more tightly around the baby. "Well, now," Caleb said quietly, his deep voice calm and gentle, "looks like you found yourself in the wrong place tonight." The baby slowly stopped crying, almost as if she understood his voice. Caleb carried the basket to his horse and secured it safely in front of the saddle. Then he climbed onto the horse and turned toward the snowy road leading out of town. The rancher had come to the depot only to collect a simple supply box. Instead, he was leaving with something far more important. As Caleb rode to a quiet Christmas night, the baby slept peacefully inside the warm blanket. The cold wind blew softly across the wide fields as Caleb Dawson rode slowly toward his ranch. Snow covered the ground like a white blanket, and the moon shone brightly in the clear night sky. The small basket rested carefully in front of Caleb on the saddle. Inside the basket, the baby slept quietly. Caleb kept one hand near the basket the entire ride, making sure the blanket stayed wrapped around her. He had handled many difficult things in his life. Wild horses, long storms, and lonely winters. But this was different. He had never taken care of a baby before. After nearly an hour of riding, the lights of Caleb's ranch house appeared in the distance. The ranch was simple but strong. A wooden house stood beside a large barn, surrounded by open land that stretched far toward the hills. Caleb guided his horse into the yard and stopped near the porch. Snow crunched under the horse's hooves as he climbed down carefully. The baby stirred a little but did not cry. Caleb lifted the basket gently and carried it inside the house. The ranch house was quiet, just as it had always been. A warm fire burned in the stone fireplace, filling the room with a soft orange glow. Caleb placed the basket on the wooden table and removed his hat. For a moment, he simply stood there looking at the baby. "Well," he said quietly to himself, "I suppose we'll figure this out somehow." The baby opened her eyes and looked around the room with curiosity. Caleb pulled a chair close to the table and sat down. He tried to remember anything he had ever seen mothers do with babies in town. Slowly and carefully, he checked the blanket to make sure she was warm. The baby made a small sound and stretched her tiny hands. Caleb gave a small, nervous smile. "You're a tough little one, aren't you?" The next morning, the sun rose over the snowy hills and bright light filled the ranch yard. The animals in the barn began to move and make their usual sounds. But inside the house, things were very different from Caleb's normal mornings. The baby woke up early and began to cry loudly. Caleb quickly got out of bed and walked to the table where he had placed the basket. He gently picked her up, trying to calm her. "Easy there, little one," he said softly. But the baby kept crying. Caleb scratched his head, unsure what to do. After a moment, he remembered that babies needed milk. So he wrapped the baby in the blanket, put on his coat, and rode into town as quickly as he could. The town of Silver Creek was busy that morning. People were still celebrating Christmas, greeting each other warmly in the streets. When Caleb walked into the small general store with the baby in his arms, everyone stopped and stared. Mrs. Carter, the friendly store owner, walked over with wide eyes. "Well, Caleb Dawson," she said with surprise. "Where did that baby come from?" Caleb explained what had happened at the depot the night before. The people in the store listened carefully, their faces filled with concern. Mrs. Carter quickly gathered some baby supplies, milk bottles, warm blankets, and soft clothes. "Looks like this little girl found the right man to help her," she said kindly. Caleb nodded quietly. Over the next few days, the news about the baby spread across Silver Creek. Many townspeople came to visit the ranch, bringing small gifts and helping Caleb learn how to care for her. The once quiet ranch slowly became filled with laughter and friendly voices. Caleb built a small wooden cradle near the fireplace, so the baby could sleep safely and stay warm. Days turned into weeks, and the baby grew stronger. One evening, as Caleb sat beside the fire holding the baby, he thought about the night he found her. It had been Christmas, a night when people believed in kindness, hope, and second chances. Caleb looked down at the baby, who was peacefully sleeping in his arms. "You know," he said softly, "Christmas is about hope." He paused for a moment, thinking carefully. "That's what I'll call you. Hope." The name felt right. From that day forward, the baby had a name, Hope Dawson. As the winter slowly passed and spring began to arrive, the ranch felt very different than it once had. Where there had once been silence, there was now life. Hope loved the sound of horses in the barn and the bright colors of the sunrise over the hills. She laughed whenever Caleb lifted her into the air or carried her outside to feel the warm sunshine. Caleb, the quiet rancher who once lived alone, now found himself smiling more than he ever had before. He had not expected his life to change that Christmas night. But sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the greatest blessings. The ranch that had once been silent was now full of energy. Hope's laughter could often be heard across the wide fields. She loved running through the tall grass, watching the horses in the barn, and riding beside Caleb on slow trips across the land. Caleb had become more than a caretaker to her. He had become her father in every way that mattered. One warm afternoon, Hope was exploring the old storage room in the ranch house. The room was filled with wooden boxes, old tools, and dusty shelves that Caleb rarely used. Hope loved exploring places like this. She enjoyed discovering small things from the past. As she moved one of the boxes, she noticed something familiar. It was the old basket. The same basket Caleb had found her in many years ago at the train depot. Caleb had kept it all this time. Hope carefully lifted the basket and brushed away the dust. Inside was a soft blanket she had been wrapped in as a baby. But there was something else. Something she had never seen before. A small silver locket lay hidden beneath the blanket. Hope picked it up gently. The metal was cool and smooth in her hand. The locket looked old but beautiful, with tiny flower patterns carved into the silver. Curious, Hope opened it. Inside were two very small spaces where pictures could be placed. But the pictures were missing. Hope stared at the empty spaces and wondered what they once held. Just then, Caleb walked into the room carrying a small toolbox. He stopped when he saw Hope holding the basket. "Well, now," Caleb said with a soft smile, "looks like you found something important." Hope turned toward him. "Caleb, was this inside the basket when you found me?" Caleb stepped closer and looked at the locket. His expression grew thoughtful. "I remember seeing that," he said slowly. "But you were so small that night, and the storm was coming. I was more worried about getting you somewhere warm." Hope sat down on a wooden chair, still holding the locket. "Do you think it belonged to my real family?" Caleb pulled up a chair beside her. "It might have," he said honestly. Hope looked down at the silver locket again. It felt like a small piece of story she didn't fully understand. That evening, Hope brought the locket into town to show Mrs. Carter and some of the other townspeople. Everyone gathered around the general store counter to look at it. Mrs. Carter adjusted her glasses and studied the locket carefully. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "this kind of design isn't very common around here." Another man in the store, old Mr. Hill, leaned closer. "I've seen something like that before," he said slowly. "Travelers sometimes carry lockets like this. They often hold pictures of family members." Hope listened carefully, her curiosity growing. "Maybe someone traveling through town left it," Mr. Hill continued. The idea made Hope think. If someone traveling had left her at the depot, where had they gone? And why had they left her there? For the first time in her life, Hope began to feel a deep curiosity about her past. Over the next few weeks, the townspeople helped search for clues. They spoke to travelers, checked old train records, and asked anyone who might remember that Christmas night many years ago. But the mystery remained unsolved. No one knew who had left the baby at the depot. One quiet evening, Hope sat outside on the ranch fence watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and pink across the hills. Caleb walked over and stood beside her. "You've been thinking a lot lately," he said gently. Hope nodded. "I just wonder sometimes about where I came from." Caleb leaned against the fence and looked out across the land. "That's natural," he said. "Everyone wonders about their story." Hope held the locket tightly in her hand. "But you know something important?" Caleb continued. Hope looked at him. "Where you started isn't the most important part of your story," Caleb said. "What matters is the life you build." Hope thought about his words. She looked across the ranch. The horses, the barn, the fields that stretched far into the distance. This was the place where she had grown up. This was the place where she had learned kindness, hard work, and friendship. This was her home. Hope closed the locket and smiled softly. "Maybe someday we'll learn the whole story," she said. Caleb nodded. "Maybe we will." The wind moved gently through the grass as the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills. The mystery of the silver locket remained unsolved. But one thing was certain. The little girl once abandoned on a cold Christmas night had found something far more important than answers on Caleb Dawson's ranch. The morning sun shone softly over the fields. Horses moved calmly near the barn, and smoke rose from the chimney of the ranch house. Inside the house, Hope Dawson was busy preparing breakfast. She had grown into a kind and confident young woman. Her warm smile and caring nature made everyone in town feel welcome around her. Many people often said that Hope brought light wherever she went. Caleb walked into the kitchen, brushing snow from his coat. "Morning, Hope," he said. "Good morning, Caleb," she replied with a smile. They sat together at the table as the sunlight filled the room. For a moment, they simply enjoyed the quiet peace of the ranch. But Hope had been thinking about something important. Over the past year, the mystery of the silver locket had made her think deeply about her life and about the night she was found at the depot. She remembered the cold platform, the empty station, and the moment Caleb had discovered her. That place had once been the beginning of her story, but now the depot looked old and forgotten. "Caleb," Hope said gently, "do you remember the old train depot?" Caleb nodded. "Of course I do." Hope looked thoughtful. "I've been thinking maybe we could do something good with that place." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "What kind of good?" Hope smiled slightly. "Turn it into a place where travelers can rest. Somewhere warm for people who might need help, just like I did once." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. That sounded like a mighty fine idea. Within a few days, Hope shared her plan with the people of Silver Creek. The townspeople loved the idea immediately. The old depot had been an important part of the town many years ago, and everyone was happy to see it brought back to life. Soon, the whole town began working together. Some people repaired the wooden walls. Others cleaned the windows and fixed the roof. Mrs. Carter helped decorate the inside with warm blankets, lanterns, and wooden tables. Caleb repaired the old porch and built a strong fireplace inside the waiting room. Day by day, the old depot slowly transformed. What had once been an empty, forgotten building became a warm and welcoming place. Hope worked harder than anyone. She swept the floors, helped paint the walls, and placed small decorations around the room. Every time she stood on the platform, she remembered the story Caleb had told her many times. The night he heard a tiny cry and found her in a basket. Now she wanted that place to be filled with kindness instead of loneliness. Finally, Christmas night arrived. Snowflakes floated gently through the quiet sky, just like they had many years ago. The depot glowed with warm lantern light. Inside, a fire burned brightly in the stone fireplace, and the room was filled with the smell of hot soup and fresh bread. Travelers passing through the town were invited inside to rest and warm themselves. Some sat near the fire, talking and laughing. Others enjoyed a quiet moment away from the cold wind. Hope stood near the doorway, greeting everyone with a warm smile. Caleb watched her proudly from across the room. The small baby he once found had grown into someone who cared deeply about helping others. Later that evening, Hope stepped outside onto the wooden platform. The snow-covered tracks stretched into the distance, just as they had long ago. Caleb joined her outside. They stood quietly under the lantern light. "This place looks very different now," Caleb said. Hope nodded. "But it still reminds me of that night." Caleb smiled gently. That night changed everything. Hope looked at the glowing windows of the depot behind them. Inside, people were safe, warm, and happy. "I'm glad it happened," she said softly. Caleb looked at her with pride. "So am I." Hope held the silver locket in her hand. She still didn't know the full story of where she came from, but she had learned something far more important. Family isn't only about where someone begins. Family is about the people who stand beside you, care for you, and help you grow. Caleb had done that for her, and now she wanted to share that same kindness with others. As the snow continued to fall gently around them, the depot stood bright and welcoming in the quiet town. The place where a lonely story had once begun had now become a place of warmth, hope, and new beginnings. Neither of them knew it yet,